You have been told that history is written by the victors. The truth is it is woven, and the thread is you. The royal weavers of Aleria were celebrated as the keepers of the nation's soul. For 300 years, their magnificent tapestries chronicled the kingdom's story: glorious battles, bountiful harvests, the long, unbroken line of its kings. These were not mere decorations. They were scripture in silk and gold. But the weavers were not historians. They were arbiters, and the loom they served did not record fate. It decided it. The golden thread that depicted a victorious battle was spun from the stolen luck of 1,000 farmers. The silver thread that showed a king's recovery from illness was paid for by a plague in the city's slums. Before we pull this thread, know that this channel is not for the complacent. We do not admire the art of history. We unravel the secrets of its creation. If you're comfortable in the grand tapestry they have woven for you, go back to your slumber. But if you have ever felt that the luck of the powerful is paid for by the misfortune of the unseen, then subscribe. Show us you are ready to see the loom. The horror of the Illyrian dynasty was not tyranny or conquest. It was a perfect, silent, and continuous act of cosmic balancing, a ruthless magical economy disguised as divine providence. Our story is set in the 15th century in the Kingdom of Aleria, a nation blessed with impossible fortune. Its kings lived to be ancient. Its armies won against overwhelming odds. Its capital city never knew famine. The world saw a miracle. The truth was a transaction, conducted in a silent, sacred chamber at the heart of the royal palace. This was the chamber of the August Loom, a place more heavily guarded than the treasury, a place where a silent, monastic order of weavers performed their terrible, necessary work. They were not creating art. They were managing the kingdom's soul, and the price was always paid by those who did not even know they were for sale. The keeper of this cosmic ledger was not the king, but a man known only as the master of the loom. An ancient, withered figure who had presided over the chamber for so long, he seemed woven into its very fabric. His eyes, clouded with cataracts, did not see the world of men. They saw only the shifting, shimmering threads of probability, the calculus of fate. His hands, stained with the faint, spectral colors of 1,000 fortunes, moved with a slow, ritualistic purpose. He was not a weaver of art. He was an accountant of souls. The August Loom itself was an entity. Carved from the petrified heartwood of a long-dead forest, it stood silent and massive in the center of the chamber. Two types of thread were fed into it. The first was the thread of fortune, spun in secret rooms from shimmering, raw gold and silver, imbued with prayers and royal desire. This was the thread used to depict the king's health, the army's victory, the nation's prosperity. The second was the thread of consequence. You must understand this was not mere black silk. It was spun from the collected sorrows of the kingdom, dust gathered from fallow fields during a drought, ash taken from the embers of a peasant's burned-down hovel, powder ground from the gravestones of plague victims. Each strand was a physical vessel of misfortune. And for every golden thread of fortune woven into the tapestry, a black thread of consequence had to be taken from the bobbins and woven into the fates of the common folk. A glorious harvest for the royal valley meant a blight woven into the fields of a remote province. The king's miraculous recovery from a fever meant a coughing sickness woven into the crowded tenements of the capital's poor. It was a perfect, terrible balance. But the loom required more than just gold and ash. It required a catalyst, an initial investment of raw human potential. This was the work of the Tithe Collectors. They were quiet, gray-robed men who traveled the kingdom, not to collect taxes, but to collect moments. They would stand unseen at the edge of a village festival and gather the ethereal filaments of collective joy. They would attend a wedding and collect the shimmering aura of new love. They would stand over the crib of a healthy newborn and gently, imperceptibly, draw off a wisp of its untainted vitality. They were harvesting the luck of the common people, drawing it into enchanted glass vials, bringing it back to the palace to be spun into the golden threads that guaranteed the king's own fortune. The man who began to unravel this secret was Master Theron, the Royal Cartographer. A man of science and reason, he was commissioned by the king to create the first truly accurate map of Aleria. For his work, he was granted access to the royal archives and to the chamber of the August Loom so that his map and the weaver's tapestry might be in perfect accord. At first, Theron was in awe. The tapestries were miracles of detail. He saw coastlines mapped with impossible precision, forests rendered tree by tree, but his scientific mind soon found a terrifying anomaly. He compared the weaver's depiction of a recent naval victory with the official reports from the admirals. The tapestry showed the enemy's flagship sinking, its main mast splintered in a precise way. The admiral's report, which had arrived a week after the tapestry was completed, described the exact same detail. It was not history, it was prophecy. His journal from that night is a testament to a rational mind confronting the impossible. May 11, 1482. The artistry of the weavers is a lie, or rather, it is a truth so profound it unmakes the world. I have cross-referenced 14 different events chronicled on the loom with my own surveys and official state records. In every single instance, the tapestry does not follow the event. It precedes it. The thread is laid before the stone is. I feel like a man who has spent his life mapping the course of a river, only to discover, with dawning horror, that the map is not a record. The map is the riverbed itself. The weavers are not depicting our world. They are creating it, but by what laws and with what ink? Theron's obsession became a quiet, dangerous investigation. He began to map not the kingdom's geography, but its fortunes. He would trace a golden thread on the tapestry, a thread depicting the miraculous routing of a border skirmish, and then cross-reference it with his own survey data from the same period. He found a chilling correlation. In the same month as the miraculous victory, a remote sheep-herding valley, a place of no strategic importance, had been devastated by a sudden, inexplicable wolf-pack attack, an event so savage it was considered a bad omen by the locals. He traced a silver thread showing the queen's recovery from a difficult childbirth, and found that in the capital's slums, the mortality rate for newborns had spiked by 50% that very week. It was a perfect one-for-one transaction, a ledger of luck. For every gain in the palace, a corresponding loss in the provinces. The kingdom was not blessed. It was a closed system, a single body where the health of the head was paid for by the sickness of the limbs. The moment of absolute, horrifying clarity came when he witnessed the tithe. He had followed one of the gray-robed collectors to a small, prosperous village celebrating its annual harvest festival. He watched from the tree line as the collector stood perfectly still at the edge of the joyous crowd. The man held a small, smoky quartz vial, and as the villagers danced and sang, Theron saw it. A faint, shimmering mist, like heat rising from summer asphalt, was being drawn from the laughing people, from their songs, their embraces, their shared relief, and coiling into the vial. The villagers felt nothing, but Theron noticed that by the end of the night, the festival's energy seemed diminished, the laughter a little more strained, the joy a little thinner. The collector had not stolen their money or their grain. He had harvested their happiness. Theron, his mind reeling, confronted the master of the loom. He laid his maps and his data on a table in the silent chamber, his hands shaking, his voice a low, accusatory whisper. "This is not art. It is arithmetic. You are balancing the kingdom's books on the backs of the innocent." The master of the loom looked up from his work, his ancient, clouded eyes showing no surprise, only a profound weariness. "You see with the eyes of a child, cartographer," he rasped, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "You see injustice, I see necessity. The kingdom is a single organism. Would you fault the heart for taking the lion's share of the blood when it is the heart that gives life to the whole? A farmer's luck is a fleeting, chaotic thing. A king's luck is the bedrock of civilization. We do not steal. We centralize. We gather the scattered, useless sparks of fortune and forge them into a steady, enduring flame that warms us all." "You call a plague a centralization," Theron shot back, his voice rising. "A regrettable but necessary expenditure," the master replied, his voice flat and final, "to ensure the king's health, which in turn ensures the stability that prevents 1,000 plagues of war and famine. The few suffer so the many may prosper under a stable hand. It is the oldest and truest law. You have mapped the land, Theron. I map the soul of the nation. Do not presume to tell me how to draw my borders." That night, Theron knew he had a choice, to remain silent and be complicit in this cosmic tyranny, or to act. But how could he fight a system that controlled fate itself? His journal reveals the desperate, radical plan taking shape in his mind. June 2, 1482. The master is right. It is a system, and every system has a fulcrum. The loom does not create fortune, it merely redirects it. The golden threads are spun from the potential of the people. The black threads are the sea. But what if one were to introduce a new thread, a thread of pure, unadulterated chaos, a variable the loom cannot account for, a debt it cannot pay? I cannot destroy the loom, but perhaps I can poison it. Theron's plan was an act of profound intellectual sabotage. He could not fight the loom's power, but as the Royal Cartographer, he had access to its source code, the archives, the maps, the very grammar of the kingdom's reality. His weapon would not be a sword, but a lie, a perfectly crafted, resonant, and utterly fictional truth. For weeks he worked in secret, creating his new thread. He did not use gold or silver, but ink and parchment. He began to forge a series of documents, ancient land deeds, crumbling monastic records, and faded maps, all meticulously aged and expertly crafted. They all told the same explosive story, that a second, lost royal bloodline existed, hidden for centuries in a remote, forgotten barony in the kingdom's northern mountains, the barony of Viridia. He invented a history for this lost lineage, a tale of secret oaths and hidden princes. He gave them a sigil, a name, the House of Corvus, and most importantly, he placed them on his new, official map of Aleria. He did not present his discovery with a flourish. He seeded the documents, one by one, into the deep royal archives, where he knew the weaver's scribes would eventually find them during their historical research. He then presented his magnificent new map to the king. The king, delighted by its beauty and precision, saw the tiny, insignificant barony of Viridia and thought nothing of it. The map was declared the official geography of the realm. It was hung in the chamber of the August Loom, directly opposite the great tapestry, a second, competing scripture of reality. The effect was not immediate. It was a slow, creeping poison. The weaver's scribes, compiling histories for a new tapestry celebrating the king's long reign, discovered Theron's forged documents. A murmur of a lost bloodline began to circulate within the palace. The weavers, bound by their sacred duty to record the kingdom's truth, were now faced with a paradox. The official map, the definitive reality, showed a place and a people whose existence was now supported by ancient records. The master of the loom knew instantly what Theron had done. He saw the beautiful, perfect lie for what it was, but he was trapped. To deny the existence of the House of Corvus would be to declare the king's new map a fiction, to admit that the archives could be wrong, to unravel the very certainty upon which their power was based. For the first time, the loom was presented with a fact that had not been paid for with a tithe. A fortune, a noble, royal lineage, had appeared from nothing. The loom, in its inexorable mathematical logic, tried to balance the books. It had to weave this new, powerful truth into the tapestry, but there was no corresponding misfortune on the bobbins to pay for it. The system began to fray. The weavers, for the first time, made mistakes. A golden thread showing the king's vitality snapped on the loom. A black thread, meant for a remote village, accidentally wove itself into the tapestry of the royal court. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The king, for the first time in his charmed life, fell gravely ill with a common fever. A border skirmish, which should have been an easy victory, turned into a bloody stalemate. At court, a strange paranoia took hold. Nobles began feuding over imagined slights. The perfect, stable fortune of the kingdom was flickering like a dying candle. The loom was trying to pay a debt for a fortune that didn't exist, and the cost was being drawn randomly from the entire system. This is the turning point, the moment a single brilliant act of rebellion throws the entire system into chaos. If you understand the power of a perfectly placed lie, the beautiful fragility of a system built on secrets, then make your presence known. This story is for those who know that sometimes the only way to fight a rigged game is to rewrite the rules. Hit the like button. Subscribe. Let us continue this unraveling together. Theron watched the chaos unfold, his heart a mixture of grim triumph and terror. He had proven his theory. He had poisoned fate, but the master of the loom was not defeated. He understood the only way to rebalance the system was to make Theron's lie a reality. If the loom could not pay the debt, it would have to collect it. He summoned Theron to the chamber. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and snapped threads. The great tapestry looked mottled and sick. "You are a clever man, cartographer," the master rasped, his voice trembling with a cold fury. "You have given the kingdom a ghost, a phantom limb whose ache is now crippling the entire body. But every ghost desires a corporeal form. The loom demands a vessel for your lie." The master revealed his final, terrible solution. He was dispatching the Tithe Collectors, not to gather whispers of luck, but to hunt. They were to travel to the barony of Viridia, find the most powerful, charismatic, and ambitious young man in that remote region, and forcibly make him into the lost prince. They would pour all the remaining ambient luck of the kingdom, all the stolen joy and vitality, into this one unsuspecting vessel. They would create a rival to the king, a figure of impossible fortune and charisma. They would make Theron's lie so powerfully, undeniably true, that the loom could finally balance its books around him. The kingdom would not be saved. It would be torn in two, consumed by a civil war between a king whose luck was fading and a prince whose fortune was a manufactured, stolen thing. This, the master explained, was the only way to reboot the system. The suffering and death of a civil war would provide a vast and terrible new supply of misfortune, enough to spin the black threads needed to pay for Theron's lie and stabilize the kingdom for a new generation. Theron, in his attempt to save the innocent, had condemned them all to a greater, more spectacular doom. The Master's plan was an act of cosmic, brutal triage. The Tithe Collectors, now acting as kingmakers, descended upon the remote barony of Viridia. They found their vessel in a young, charismatic nobleman named Kalen, the second son of a minor lord, a man whose ambition burned far brighter than his prospects. He was handsome, cunning, and possessed a natural magnetism. He was the perfect empty canvas. Over the course of a single month, they began the process of investiture. In a series of secret rituals, they funneled the stolen luck of the kingdom into him. The shimmering mist from 1,000 happy memories, the raw vitality of a generation of newborns, the collective joy of a dozen harvest festivals, it was all poured into Kalen. His hair took on a golden sheen. His eyes began to burn with an unnatural charisma. When he spoke, men instinctively wanted to follow him. He began to win impossible wagers. He survived a hunting accident that should have killed him without a scratch. He was no longer just a man. He was a walking vessel of pure, concentrated fortune. Back in the capital, the king's decline accelerated. His body grew frail, his mind clouded with paranoia. The kingdom's fortunes withered. The once victorious armies suffered humiliating defeats. A rot took hold in the royal granaries. The people, who had known nothing but stability, began to starve and whisper of rebellion. They began to pray for a savior. And then, as if in answer to their prayers, stories began to trickle down from the northern mountains. Stories of a lost prince of the House of Corvus, a young lord of impossible charm and luck, who had begun to speak of the true, ancient royal bloodline and the usurper king in the capital. The lie Theron had so carefully planted was now a living, breathing, and impossibly fortunate man. Theron, a prisoner in his own map room, could only watch in horror. He had created a monster, not of malice but of pure, weaponized luck. He tried to warn the king's council, to explain that Kalen was a fabrication, a tool of the loom, but they saw only a cartographer driven mad by his own arcane studies. His warnings were dismissed. The civil war, when it came, was not a war of armies, but of fates. Kalen's small band of followers swelled into a massive host, drawn by his unnatural charisma. His strategies were audacious and always succeeded. The king's generals, once brilliant tacticians, made inexplicable, clumsy mistakes. The weather itself seemed to conspire against the royal army, with sudden fogs and freak storms hampering their movements. It was as if the universe itself had chosen a side. The final battle took place on the plains before the capital city. It was a slaughter. The royal army, depleted and demoralized, simply broke and fled. The king was captured in his throne room, a frail, withered old man, his luck finally exhausted. Theron watched the aftermath from a high tower. He saw Kalen, the lost prince, ride into the city, his golden hair gleaming in the sun, the adoring crowd screaming his name. He saw the master of the loom standing on the steps of the palace, his ancient face showing a grim, weary satisfaction. The books were balanced. The suffering and death of the civil war had restocked the bobbins with a vast and terrible supply of black thread. The lie was now the truth. A new king was on the throne, the system was stable again, and the only cost was 100,000 lives and the soul of the man who had tried to save them. The master of the loom granted Theron one final, cruel mercy. He was not executed. He was made the Royal Cartographer for the new King Kalen. His punishment was to spend the rest of his life meticulously mapping the new, blessed kingdom he had created, to chart the prosperity paid for by the blood he had spilled, to serve the monster he had birthed. He was a prisoner in the perfect, stable, and prosperous hell of his own design. His only companion, the terrible knowledge that sometimes, the only thing worse than a tyrant who controls fate, is the chaos that comes from trying to set it free. The reign of King Kalen the Fortunate was recorded in the history books and woven into the grand tapestry as a golden age. The kingdom prospered, the harvests were bountiful, the borders were secure. The August Loom, its cosmic ledger rebalanced with the blood of the Civil War, hummed with a quiet, terrible efficiency. The system worked more perfectly than ever. Theron lived to be an old man, a ghost in the palace, forever bent over his maps. His punishment was to be the sole witness to the success of his failure. He watched as the Tithe Collectors once again spread out across the peaceful, prosperous kingdom, silently harvesting the joy from a new generation of unsuspecting souls, gathering the threads to ensure the continued, impossible luck of the king he had created. He had not broken the system. He had merely replaced the monarch. He had fed the machine, and it had rewarded him with a gilded cage and a front row seat to the quiet, ongoing damnation of his people. The master of the loom eventually withered away, replaced by a new, younger master, and the ancient, sacred work continued. The Kingdom of Aleria remained a jewel of civilization, its beauty and stability a marvel to the world. A perfect, beautiful lie, woven from the stolen happiness and silent sorrows of millions. This is the final, most bitter truth of power. It does not yield, it adapts. It consumes its opposition and uses it as fuel. Theron's rebellion did not destroy the loom. It gave it the greatest infusion of power it had ever known. He is the ultimate cautionary tale, a man who saw the truth, fought the system, and in doing so, became its most effective and tragic instrument. His story was never woven into the tapestry. He was the price of the ink, the cost of the thread, the man whose very existence was the cost of the story being told. And the lie became the foundation of the world. The tale of the August Loom is not a fable of a forgotten kingdom. It is the operating manual for the world you inhabit. It reveals the fundamental, hidden law of power, that fortune is not a force to be courted, but a resource to be managed, that the impossible luck of the few is always, always paid for by the managed, systemic misfortune of the many. The loom is not a magical artifact. It is the complex, invisible system of finance, media, and politics that governs your reality. The golden threads are the miraculous stock market rallies, the unexpected political victories, the charmed lives of the elite. The black threads are the quiet factory closures, the unexplainable rise in chronic illness in a poor neighborhood, the bad luck of a family bankrupted by a medical bill. It is all a single, closed system. A terrible, perfect balance. The tithe collectors are no longer robed men with glass vials. They are the applications on your phone, harvesting your joy, your anger, your desire, and your outrage, converting the raw, chaotic energy of your life into clean, predictable data, the fuel that powers the modern loom. You are not the customer, you are the tithes. And Theron's story is a warning that a frontal assault on the system is futile. It is designed to absorb and profit from your rebellion. Your outrage becomes their engagement. Your protest becomes their content. Your revolution becomes their new, marketable brand. So what is left? Not a grand, heroic battle, but a small, personal, and profoundly powerful act of sabotage. The choice to stop feeding the loom. The choice to reclaim your own fortune, your own sorrow, your own life, and to refuse to let it be spun into the grand tapestry. You must learn to weave your own story, even if it is small, messy, and unseen by the world. Because a million small, unseen tapestries are more powerful than one great, beautiful lie. It is time to make your choice. Will you be a thread in their design, or will you be a weaver of your own? In the comments below, make your declaration. State it twice to seal your intent. I weave my owns. I weave my owns. This is not a petition. It is a vow, a quiet recognition of your own power to refuse the tithes. If you are ready to continue this work of unraveling, subscribe. Activate the notification bell, for the sound of the loom is constant and designed to lull you into compliance. Share this with one other person who you suspect is also beginning to see the threads. They want you to admire the beauty of their tapestry. They want you to believe their fortune is a blessing. We are here to show you the cost of every golden thread and to teach you how to cut it.